Kia ora te whānau o iho karaiti. As you can see, I'm in a different environment today. Lynn and I are on holiday in Golden Bay, and I just want to show you just a little bit of what the view's like out the window. Well, there you have it. So you can all be jealous, but by the time this is loaded up, we should be back in Lincoln. Now, the text for Sunday the 22nd of October, the Gospel of Matthew chapter 22 verses 15 through to 22. The Pharisees went and plotted to entrap Jesus in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with truth and show deference to no one. For you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test? You hypocrites, show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Then he said to them, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that belong to the emperor, and to God the things that belong to God." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And you may be thinking, where did that come from? Well, here's the thing. We've got two groups of people working together to trip Jesus. They're the Pharisees and the Herodians. They are not friends. In fact, they receive one another through malignant eyes. They see one another as people who aren't the real deal. On the one hand, we have the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees arose, I think, out of the Babylonian captivity. That as Israel settled into this new place for decades, they had to find a new way of worshipping. Just like in the Boney M song, quotation from one of the Psalms, "By the rivers of Babylon where we sat down, how will we worship the Lord in a strange land?" And out of that, the synagogue appeared. And the synagogue is the place for the Pharisees, the local church. They no longer had access to temple worship. They no longer had access to the sacrificial system. So they had to do something else. So they became a people that were focused on the Torah. They were focused on the Word. And this is what they did. And so the rabbis sprung up out of that. And there was this group of people then who were spread throughout Israel through their synagogues, who were the basis of worship and of gathering together and bringing themselves before the Lord. And they were a people who wanted to be faithful to the scriptures. And so they were very focused on obeying the law, because one of the things they didn't want to happen was what happened before and find themselves again in captivity. And one of the big issues that you'll see as you read through the Gospels is the observance of the Sabbath. For the Pharisees, they put a lot of the disaster that happened down to the non-observance of the Sabbath, which is why they were so hard on Jesus with relation to this. They were terrified of that ever happening again. And so they were people who were committed to obeying God, because they didn't want to get it wrong. They were people who were committed to the sovereignty of God. God was their king. And so for them, the idea of having a Caesar or an Edomite from a family of Edomites named Herod as their ruler was not okay for them. It was not okay. And it said something of the lack of God's sovereignty and rulership over Israel. They were an oppressed people. Now, on the other hand, the Herodians, it seemed they didn't have any difficulty with either the Romans or the Herods. They thought they were a good thing. They kept the peace. They kept everything steady and stable, and it was fine. And I'd suspect they'd say, you know, these are God's gift to us. God has appointed it. It may not be as you'd imagine, but, you know, you see in the history, things like Cyrus, you know, he wasn't Jewish, but he was God's anointed. And so here we see the similar kind of thing. They all have familiar kind of rings to them, don't they? We see these things being acted out even in our own time. And so these two groups were not friends, and yet they saw Jesus as a greater threat. And so the question is how they're going to deal with him. So what they did was they came up with a gotcha question. You know, the one that it didn't matter how Jesus answered it. One way or another, they were going to get him. Because for them, it was a binary choice. The answer to the question, do we pay taxes to Caesar or not, was either yes or no. What other options were there? You could only say yes or no, and their thinking was this binary thinking. We often see it today in debates. We just want to hear yes or no, yes or no. And sometimes the answers are more complex and more sophisticated than a simple yes or no. But that was where they were going with this. So if they asked the question, there was the answer for them would be that if you were part of the Pharisee group, if Jesus said yes to the question, yes, it was okay to pay taxes to Caesar, you could say, look, he's not really one of us. This guy is a heretic. This guy is leading us astray. This guy is not true to the word of God. This guy is real trouble. Ignore him. And if he said no, well, then the Herodians are able to say, look, this man is a danger. This man is someone, and they could report him to the Roman authorities, he's seditious. He's going to lead a rebellion. You need to attend to him. And so they were confident one way or another that they were going to catch Jesus out with this. And so what do? They start with a flattery. We know what an earnest, sincere man you are. We know your deep love for the word of God. We know your commitment to doing the right thing. And we know that you're not bothered by whether people like you or not. Your commitment is to truth and the way of truth. Tell us then. And I could imagine Jesus as he's sitting there, he's listening to the words and he's thinking, oh yeah, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. There's something coming. And then they ask the question. We want to know, should we be paying taxes to Caesar or not? Right. And I could almost imagine him laughing out loud and say, that's the best you've got? Come on, that's the best. Bring me a denarius. He says, whose image is this? It's Caesar's. Whose name is this? It's Caesar's. Well then, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give to God what belongs to God. And they're gobsmacked. They've got no answer to that. Where do you go with that? It's not a binary answer. It's not a yes or no, but it's a great answer. And so they go on their way. Now, here's the thing. This is part of a bigger picture. That as you look at this text within the gospel that we find it here, and look at all the other things that are going around him, that the Pharisees, the Herodians, and the Sadducees, now these are the people of the temple. These are the people who control the temple. None of them are friends. None of them are friends. But they're playing tag team. They're taking turns about at trying to trip Jesus up because they all see Jesus as a threat. For them, he has united them against himself. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Because they see him as a real danger. As things are at the moment, things are kind of steady. There's a stasis, there's a kind of evenness to how things are going. And we're doing okay. We don't need anybody, not this rebel rouser, upsetting the apple cart. upsetting the social order, leading to a possible rebellion, and the Romans coming in heavy-handed again and asserting their right to rule by doing huge damage to our people. Imagine the slaughter that could ensue. Imagine the deaths. Imagine what would happen to us and the loss of our position and privilege. Just imagine it. It's hard to just leave it there, isn't it? As we have been observing what's been happening in Israel and Gaza over more than the last week, there is no way of justifying the actions of Hamas and their brutality in not just what they did, but how they did it, in slaughtering hundreds of Israelis, many hundreds, and others caught up in it. Innocent people, civilians just going about their everyday lives, and the terrible things that they did, often recording them to show people how brutal that they could be. I want to suggest it gives the appearance of them being provocative, and intentionally so. Then we hear the Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that the actions that we will take against this people will reverberate for generations. My hunch, my worry is that's exactly what Hamas want. They want the sense of grievance to be able to be perpetuated. The reality is that the population of Gaza, somewhere around 2.2 million, 40% of them are under 15. Half of the Gazan population are children. And you think that once you start bombing their buildings and their homes and their hospitals and their power stations and their universities and their mosques and their shops and marketplaces, you think that when we're going to do it, though, they're going to forget. That they're going to forget the terrible things that were perpetrated against them. I think it's important to separate Hamas from the Palestinian people at one level. It's true that Hamas in some ways reflects part of the way that Palestine is. After all, they were brought to power in elections in 2006. But my understanding is that there haven't been any elections since. That's nearly 20 years ago. That these people have ruled Gaza with an iron fist. And the Gazans find themselves trapped. This is one of the most densely populated parts of the planet. And it's, in theory, an independent state. It's, in theory, not governed by Israel. And it's actually in Israel's interests, for reasons that we don't have time to go into, to keep it that way. But the reality is that, and even one of their ministers recently has said this, that it's effectively, this is Israel's ministers, has said it's effectively an open prison. And that's how it's run. Israel controls everything that goes in and out of Gaza. They're always keeping a watch on what's happening within it. Always. The Gazans aren't free. The levels of unemployment are huge. And there's nowhere for them to go. The difficulty that we have is that in the 90s, I think it was, I remember back then, it was a strong push for a two-state solution, which seems and still seems like a good idea. Hamas would never accept it. They do not recognize the legitimacy of Israel. They do not believe that it has a right to exist. They are wanting a full-blown Islamic state. And they've consistently said no to the idea of a two-state solution. And Israel has historically said yes, that they were open to it. And yet when you saw what they were doing at the same time, continuing to pursue expansionist policies in the West Bank, which have only cranked up over the last year or so, becoming much more aggressive, you see that actually they've never really been serious about it either. And so we see this impasse where the Palestinians have constantly been under the hammer, and they lash out with what they can and have over decades. Israel, for them, they just want the Palestinians to go away. The books that I've read about this would indicate really that's what they're interested in. I don't believe that they're interested in committing genocide against the Palestinians, but they want to give them incentive to leave. And for the Palestinians, where would they go? For them, this is their homeland. It has been for many centuries. And it was given away by the British to this nascent group of Jews way back at the turn of the 20th century. This, for them, is their homeland. So the question is, how can these two peoples live together? It seems to me that it's only through Jesus' kingdom of God kind of thinking could this ever be possible. It's the only way where a commitment, where energy putting into a way forward that guarantees justice for all, where there are no firsts and lasts, where each group isn't regarding the issue as simply a zero-sum game, where in order for them to be winners, which have to be us, they have to be losers, which are them. But more a willingness to say, actually, we can make this work. We recognise that we're different. We can make this work if there's a willingness to walk and work together. It seems, doesn't it, friends, a long way off. And what's happening at the moment isn't helping. The kingdom of God, if only. Amen. God bless you.